What if the world is far stranger than we've been led to believe? This September 12th, step into the virtual world of Anomicon 2026, the premier online conference exploring UFOs, the paranormal, consciousness, cryptozoology, folklore, and all things anomalous. Hosted by me, Ryan Sprague of Somewhere in the Skies, and our leading researcher, Suzanne Landers, and featuring legendary paranormal broadcaster, Jim Harold. Anomicon 2026 brings together researchers, journalists, filmmakers, authors, experiencers, and investigators from all around the world. And best thing about Anomicon, there's no travel, no hotels, no expensive tickets whatsoever. It is 100% free to watch. Join us for fascinating ideas, original presentations, anomalous-themed music videos, and a global community exploring the unknown together. Watch Anomicon 2026 this September 12th on the Somewhere in the Skies YouTube channel. And to learn all about our speakers and their presentations, be sure to visit anomicon.com. Links are in the video description or the podcast show notes. We hope to see you there September 12th. And remember, the anomalous is waiting for you at Anomicon 2026.
Spectrovision Radio.
While our government's official position is not to speculate on this subject, we can choose to let our minds explore other possibilities, to use our imaginations. For if we consider that astroscientists agree on one point, that the possibility of life elsewhere is not only quite probable, some feel it is there without a doubt. Let us suppose then that these objects are real space vehicles, extraterrestrial in origin, and not an illusion of the mind.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Welcome to Somewhere in the Skies. I am your host, Ryan Sprague, and boy, has it been a while since we've had a new interview here on the channel. Now, for many of you who may or may not know, I work in Canada primarily, and I host a ghost hunting show out in Nova Scotia. And I recently got back home here to Scotland in the UK about a few weeks ago and caught a really nasty virus, which then turned into bronchitis and a respiratory infection. And then I was on medication that also made me sick. And it's just been an absolute spiral since then. A nightmare to say the least. But I want to thank you guys for sticking with me through all of it. You know, we had some classic episodes of the show that we put up on the podcast and the channel. So I want to thank you guys for checking those out. It may have been a revisit for some of you, a rewind as well, but appreciate you checking those out while I try to heal myself and get better for you. But I couldn't think of a better medicine and a better guest to come back in full force with, and that is the one and only Joshua Cutchin, my good friend and colleague. We've spoken at conferences together and we've done interviews together and stuff like that. And I was so excited to hear about his brand new book that recently released, and it's called The Inverted Path: Supernatural Disorientation and Interruptions in Travel, with a brilliant book cover by the one and only Mr. Sam Sheeran as well. So shout out to Sam. If you're watching this, be sure to check out all of his artwork too. And this book, guys, blew me away. I got a advanced copy of it and I'm still making my way through a lot of it. But I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation. It's really unlike a lot of the conversations we have here on Somewhere in the Skies. It's not just UFO specific, but it really gets into a lot of stuff. You know, the idea of being pixie-led and fairies and the supernatural and paranormal and these moments in our lives where we are either disoriented or we are interrupted or we are just literally stopped in our tracks and what that can mean, and what that can mean when it comes to these phenomena. Are they interconnected? Is this something they all have in common? The way they're able to, malfunction our machines, our automobiles, our planes, or things like that, or literally paralyze us in place, or we become disoriented and lost when we're in the woods and we see a Bigfoot, or whether we're in a house and it's haunted and we don't know where we're going, which door to use. Like all these different thoughts and theories and things, Joshua has really put into a cohesive and pretty profound book. And I really hope you'll check out the book. I really hope you'll check out this interview. And it was fascinating. I learned so much. I had a great time with Joshua. Be sure to check out all of his work at the links in the show notes on YouTube here or on the podcast as well. And while you're at it, please take just a few moments to rate and review Somewhere in the Skies on Apple and on Spotify. Leave us a comment, a review, whatever you can. It helps out the show tremendously. If you'd like to help us out even further, you can support us on Patreon, on Apple Premium, and on YouTube membership as well. The links for all of those are in the show notes or video description too. But for now, I'm going to leave you with this interview as I continue to try to get my health back to where it needs to be, and just look forward to some awesome interviews coming to you in the coming weeks here on the show, and very special episodes as well. And the live stream is back too, so join us every Sunday for that too. I hope you're having a wonderful summer so far, and thank you so much for sticking with us here at Somewhere in the Skies. But without further ado, let's get to our interview with the one and only Joshua Cutchin. Welcome back to Somewhere in the Skies, and a huge welcome back to Joshua Cutchin. My friend, it has been way too long. How are you?
It's been a while. I'm doing really well. Very busy, but very grateful.
Yeah, talk about, kind of hitting the ground running. You have had a hell of a year, whether it's the books you've written, the conferences you've spoken at. The most recent one that I caught that you were speaking at was Contact in the Desert. So before we even get to your brand new book, which is kind of going to be the core of this conversation today, the book is called The Inverted Path: Supernatural Disorientation and Interruptions in Travel. We're going to talk all about it, but tell me about Contact in the Desert. What did you talk about there? And what was that experience like? I've never been to Contact in the Desert in person.
It was incredible, and incredibly gratifying. And it was, I have so many thoughts, and it was sort of a bucket list for me for the longest time. I've been around many experiencers. I have many friends who are experiencers. I've been to many events with experiencers, but everything feels a bit different when you go, 50 feet and talk to a random person and they've had stories that can knock your socks off, So that was part of it. I spoke on some Ecology of Souls material. I spoke on some Fourth Wall Phantoms material. Also did a podcast with Kelly Chase and introduced some people. Like they kept us hustling, but it was a good kind of busy, if that makes any sense. So yeah, it was absolutely eye-opening in tons of ways. And what's interesting is it's a lot of times when I leave conferences, I have this sort of like void where it's like, oh, I just really, it's sort of like a hangover. And I had a little bit of that, but also I think just the fact that it was, I got enough time with a lot of people, which I think sort of made me a little bit more ready to come home than I might have been, but not in like a, oh, I don't want to do this anymore because I could have stayed another 3 weeks. Right. But like more in a sense of like, oh, that was a satisfying experience. So it was absolutely wonderful. And yeah, it's been a wild ride of a year. Something like eight events or something. I just got back recently from the Lilydale Symposium up in New York that Shannon Taggart puts on. That the new book, I was on the Y-Files back in June. The day that my Y-Files interview dropped was the same day that my new book dropped. So it was a very hectic June. It was perfect, yes, but for a while there, I basically had an email job where I was just answering emails all day, every day for a couple of weeks. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I caught a little bit of the Y-Files interview. I'm hoping to go back and digest a little bit more. And that's what I love about your work is when you buy a Joshua Cutchin book, you're not sitting down for like a breeze through, in one day. Like this is a book you could use as a weapon. Literally, they're so big. But I love it, man, because I can go back to Ecology of Souls and whatnot, and the Phantom Smells book. That's still like one of my favorite ones too. And I love that you can pick up one of your books when something like dawns on you. Whether it's like you experience a certain phenomenon, you hear a discussion on these things, and you're like, I want to know what Joshua Cutchin thinks of this. And I know he has at some point. So that's what I love about your
Well,
books. And it's no different with this new one, I would assume.
my friend that I wrote my Bigfoot books with, Timothy Renner, one time referred to the paranormal as having this sort of spider webbing quality, right? And of course, you know me well enough by now to know that I lump UFOs under the paranormal umbrella. But I think with certain topics that I look into, I fall prey to that. But I also think it sort of offers a more holistic picture, right? So, a good example is this new book, The Inverted Path, where it became very apparent halfway through, to me at least, that these sort of paranormal disorientation narratives have a lot to do with these sort of tropes of UFOs stopping cars. We can explain that later, but the point that I would get at is that, like, so you just want to talk about, I'm just going to talk about, disorientation, and then you're like, well, what about time slips? Aren't they kind of that same thing? And then if you're going to talk about time slips, then you got to talk about these phantom diner narratives that you see across Fortiana. So it's just like, you sort of end up with a book that you can use as a weapon.
Well, let's start there. Now, the
Okay.
inverted path. I love the title. You mentioned, kind of some of the ideas that are in it, whether it's cars stopping when UFO things happen, time seems to slip away, missing time and stuff like that, or you have these paranormal experiences as well. I get a lot of reports in the UFO field of people experiencing what they call the Oz factor when they see a UFO. And nobody truly knows how to define these things. As our good friend Greg Bishop would say, like it defies definition, it defies logic at times. Um, and I'd love to know what kind of led you on that path, I guess, to write the inverted path. Where did this idea kind of stem from, I guess?
Well, with so much of what I have tried to do over the past, good Lord, I can't believe this, 11 years, I guess. It's been really sort of looking at one small aspect, with the exception of some of my more recent output, like Ecology of Souls and Fourth Wall Phantoms. It's mostly been about looking at one small aspect that's been sort of talked about in sort of a throwaway passage or a paragraph or a sentence, and never really sort of like teased out and taken apart and looked at how it sort of echoes across the whole of the paranormal. So a lot of what I do is the comparative aspect, sort of putting a lot of the things that we see in cryptozoology in dialogue with parapsychology, and in dialogue as ever with ufology. But for the inverted path, as as often happens with me, it begins in fairy folklore, right? And I had seen some parallels to some disorientation narratives in fairy folklore as compared to the UFO phenomenon, which, again, nothing new there. This goes all the way back to 1969 and Passport to Magonia. Thank you, Dr. Valet. But, Passport to Magonia for me is the gift that keeps on giving, because there are these little resonances that you can continue to unpack. So I've been long fascinated with this particular aspect of fairy folklore, which is known as being pixie-led. Now, you can't necessarily apply that term globally, although I do. Technically, pixies, pisties, pisgies are a Western English phenomenon. So like, Cornwall, Dorset, Somerset, those sort of areas. But the idea echoes itself through fairy folklore worldwide, and also through different aspects of the paranormal, as I try to illustrate. And in these pixie-led narratives, people get lost, and it's inevitably blamed on their local variation on the fairy folk. In Ireland, it would just be called sort of being led astray, because the Irish were very much of the mindset that you shouldn't necessarily refer to the fairies by name. They'd have all these euphemisms, and they would refer to them as they. So they'd never say anything like, "Oh, well, I was fairy-led." They'd say, like, "I was led astray," but that's totally what they meant. And in the context of the pixie-led phenomenon specifically, And one of my favorite scholars in this space, Dr. Simon Young, who is, I would argue, the world's authority on being pixie led, divided them into two experiences, which were wandering experiences and field crossing experiences. And the wandering experiences are the ones that sort of have a veneer of plausible deniability to them. So you're walking a familiar path, and all of a sudden you start paying attention. And you're like, wait, where am I? And there's always this sort of implication that maybe I took a wrong turn, or I just got turned around, or this or that or the other. Typically in these narratives of both sorts, the spell will break and you'll hear laughter and you'll suddenly know where you are again. The more dramatic versions of this are those field crossing experiences that Young pointed to, which are a typical narrative would be someone, again, is taking a familiar path. In rural England, especially in years past, that would often take you across other people's land, fields, etc. And in these narratives, you might walk into a field that you know is the right way, and then you'll be like, well, wait, there should be a gate here. Why can't I get out here? And you look and you can't find it. You say, okay, well, I'm going to turn around and retrace my steps and go back out. And the entrance is gone as well. And so you find there's this entire body of stories, of which I only, scratch the surface in this book, where people are basically trapped in these spaces for hours on end. In the most dramatic versions, they will literally see their destination, over the hedgerow or, over the stone wall that they can't get over. And they'll just be trapped until, for various reasons, and we can get into that or not, but through self-remedy or just the spell breaking, oh, there's the gate. I guess it was there all along, even though I looked and looked and looked and looked. So once you start taking a look at this sort of like these two sort of ideas of wandering into places that you might not have had volition over your control, or like going into old spaces that are rendered suddenly unfamiliar, I think it's becomes rather easy to put that in dialogue with the UFO phenomenon. Because if you look at sort of the alien abduction research that was done in years past, your mileage may vary with some of those researchers. I understand that. But if we just look at the accounts as presented, it's very common to see people say, well, for some reason I turned down this road that I had no reason to turn down. And
Right.
that's where their experience unfolds, right? And, even beyond that, so many of these UFO narratives feature this sort of unnatural compulsion. I mean, you've heard it 1,000 times. I don't know why I decided to look out the window, but I did, and that's when I saw the UFO. Or like, I didn't really need to check on the front gate, but I did, and when I went outside, that's when XYZ happened. So there's this sort of implied compulsion to relocate, to move, to change one's behavior that I think graphs on really well from the pixie-led narratives to the modern ufological scene.
Hmm. Very interesting. Now, I want to kind of dive into, there's the pixie led, but there's also this idea of this all being somewhat happenstance,
Yeah.
like uh whenever I get UFO reports, people are like, I didn't go out looking for this. Like, I think I just happened to be right place, right time, right place, wrong time. I don't
Mhm.
know. It really, like you said, my mileage varies when it comes to like, if you wanted this to happen, if you didn't want this to happen, and how you interpret that. So in terms of like being led astray or down a different path, what about the opposite of that, Josh? Like, is that a whole other part of this as well? Of like, this was meant to happen to these people that it happened to.
Yeah, I think that there are certain this sort of body of folklore, again, just strictly looking at the sort of fairy aspect of it, because that has the most sort of superstition and whatnot around it. There were certain activities that you could do that would put you more at risk, or less at risk. Would be preventative action, right? um, for example, there was a lot of gendered activity in a lot of older cultures that would sort of put people at risk. There were certain times that were prohibited to, for example, I believe, spin yarn. Like after a certain hour, don't spin yarn, or else you might be led astray.
Okay.
Wood chopping for men was very common. If you go out into the woods to chop wood, that's when you're more at risk. Something that speaks to has a lot of implications, let's say, is berry picking. Berry picking was typically in a lot of cultures a gendered activity for women, and they would go out, and that would be one of the times you'd be most vulnerable. In fact, there's an entire body of stories in Newfoundland specifically about people who go out, uh, into the forest to pick berries and find themselves taken away or led astray, or basically put into sort of this dissociative fugue of sorts, that's almost always blamed on the fairies. So I'm not entirely sure that gets at your question, because you're sort of getting at like this fated predestination kind of thing. But there are hints across various stories that the distinction between where we want to go and where we are led to go, where we are compelled to go, is not always entirely clear. There's a wonderful story from an archaeologist, I believe, by the name of Basil Barnum, who was in Dartmoor, and he just went out for a walk one evening, and he just found himself, the next thing it wasn't an unfamiliar place, right? But he found himself wandering into this place that he had no idea where he was, and he assumed that he had been led there by the Pixies, and it was near one of these Iron Age ring forts, and he saw his eyes happened to fall upon an older Iron Age axe, and he was about to collect it, and he had a voice in his head say, "No, leave it there." But it's one of those few stories that really makes it explicit that you can sort of be led by surrendering control. Perhaps, we like to think of getting lost in the modern context as being, oh, I was absent-minded. But the question that I would ask is, when you're absent-minded, what comes in to fill that absence? To the extent that I think that altered states of consciousness might indeed play a role in these narratives. It's interesting to note that being pixie-led there's sort of an old saying that to be pixie-led is to be whiskey-led, right? And the term pixelated that we now associate with, screens and whatnot, meant to be disoriented or to be intoxicated. And there are a lot of narratives where people come home from the tavern and then they lose their way, and it's like, oh, well, these people were just drunk. But as Dr. Simon Young points out, there are also plenty of narratives about young people who are in these sort of those field crossing experiences where their surroundings completely change in broad daylight. Some people who are teetotalers, they don't touch a drink of alcohol. So there's something going on here, which is sort of a combination of factors that I think that allows us sometimes to be hijacked, perhaps.
Interesting. Well, I like that term, hijacked, because I'm thinking like, these people are in motion, they're in transition, literally, whether they're walking through a field, driving down a lonely road, something like that. Do you see this as like someone's in a, let's say, like a major life transition of some sort? We often hear that paranormal activity will increase when it's a pivotal moment in someone's life, a very emotional moment, things like that, and the phenomena kind of gets attracted to that. Do you see any correlations between like these people being in transition and also this transformation happening to them with these phenomena, I guess?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, so I would sort of lead into that rather by asking you, are you tired of seeing the way the word liminal has been misused across the internet?
Yeah, especially with back rooms coming out.
Yeah, and like I get what they're getting at, but like
Yeah,
liminal has become an internet word for spooky, wherein actually in its truest sense, it means that sort of state in between, or a more marginalized state. So I was speaking a moment ago about some of these sort of traditionally gendered activities that would allow you to become or put you more at risk of being pixie-led. And there's a scholar by the name of Peter Narvaez who looked at those Newfoundland narratives of being led astray or being fairy-led while picking berries. And if you look at sort of the roles, the people who filled those roles, I mean, honestly, yesterday and today, they are generally marginalized communities, right? They're sort of communities that patriarchy's pushed to the fringes. So women, and now today, a lot of migrant workers, the very similar sort of cohort. And that's always sort of been the fairy MO, right? It's always been people who are deemed, whether they are or not, the most vulnerable. There's always a longstanding belief that the children that were at most risk of becoming changelings were those who were born but not baptized. So again, the sort of idea of a liminal space. So yeah, there is a little bit of that. It's not as clearly indicated to me in the UFO literature. However, there is a caveat here, which is that the very act of traveling is an act of transition, right? So it's always a liminal state whenever you're pixie-led by definition, because you're neither at your destination nor your starting point, right? You're always in transit. So it's thematically another expression of that sort of liminal idea. So while it doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, well, I was between marriages, or, oh, I was between, residences or anything like that, there always is in the moment, in that sort of immediate sense, a liminal state that people are in during these experiences. Yeah, I find it very interesting that sleep paralysis happens in one of those liminal states between wakefulness and between being asleep. And there's a mildly comparable state called highway hypnosis that's been talked about. And if you really want to terrify yourself, Ryan, like go look into the highway hypnosis literature, and you realize how common and easy it is to happen. It's like, it's really terrifying, because not in a supernatural sense, but in a sense of like, oh, I'm behind this giant hunk of metal going 80 miles an hour and I might enter an altered state. But you do see references to that as well as being a possible altered state of consciousness that people lapse into while traveling. I've kind of had this happen myself. I make no bones about the fact that I'm a recovering alcoholic. So this was not when I was drinking, though. This was not when I was drinking. I was sober at this point. But traveling up Interstate 85 between Atlanta and where my parents lived, a lot of that is getting across the Greenville-Spartanburg metro area in South Carolina. And I distinctly remember there was one time, probably around 2007 or 2008. No, it would have been 2008 or 2009. Where I just have no memory of going across that entire metro area.
Wow.
Now, part of it is probably because it's always a chore to get across that, and I probably dissociated a little bit. But at the same time, the idea that I would dissociate behind the wheel is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I travel by road so much when I'm in the States and when I'm working in Canada, and I will find myself 3 hours into a drive being like, "Whoa, where did that time go?"
You zone
Like,
out, yeah.
yeah, you're listening to a podcast, and all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, "What? What
Yeah.
just happened?" And you're right. You're going 80 miles per hour. You're swerving in and out of traffic with these other metal tubes and vehicles all around you. God
Yeah.
forbid a deer tries to cross
Yeah.
that interstate or whatnot. And
I mean,
meanwhile, my brain isn't even like processing what I'm doing. It's crazy.
it's probably comparable to the flow states that athletes and musicians get into when they're sort of doing their thing. It's probably comparable to that. But I would argue that if altered states of consciousness seem to play a role, not always, but often, in facilitating contact or being able to see whatever this other space is, and that seems to be indicated across a variety of literature and the sleep paralysis, the stuff, then maybe something about the act of traveling highway hypnosis, does that as well. Now, I don't think that highway hypnosis happens when you're moving on foot or on horseback, as in some of these stories. But at the same time, I think that something similar might happen where you sort of your mind wanders and then something rushes in to fill that vacuum.
Yeah. And what rushes in to fill that, I think, is where the real questions lay. We talked a little bit about kind of UFOs and whatnot, a little bit of paranormal, but I'd love to touch on this aspect with you, because there are cases in your book where you cover cryptids, whether it's like Bigfoot and stuff like that, getting lost in the forest, encountering one of these hominids or missing links or something like that. Where do you think cryptids lay in this whole
Right.
idea of the inverted path and I can't even say the word, man. Disorientation. Good Lord.
Yeah,
Highway
your tongue has been pixie led.
bad.
Yes, so the book, as sort of a 10,000-foot view, is disorientation and stopping. And within each of those sections, I look at the fairy stuff, I look at the UFO stuff, I look at the ghost literature. There's examples of that. I look at the anomalous light literature, which has significant overlap with the fairy literature and the ghost stuff, and then the cryptid stuff too. And I'm a contrarian, Ryan. Is really what it is. Like, I want to like, and it's not that I criticize cryptozoology because I love cryptozoology and I love cryptozoologists. But so in the context of specifically the most famous cryptid celebrity, right, being Bigfoot, these sort of stories happen quite often as well, where people will completely lose their way. Um, Typically, the answer you will hear from cryptozoologists as to why this happens is the speculation that Bigfoot employ infrasound, which is below the level of human hearing. And infrasound can indeed sort of produce all sorts of effects similar to being, but among them is disorientation as well. Now, look, I am not one to say that um, whatever the fairy phenomenon represents doesn't use infrasound. I'm not one to say that the UFO phenomenon doesn't use infrasound or ghosts. Maybe all these things are using infrasound to instill this sort of disorientation, right? I'm not saying that's not the case, but what I do think needs to be acknowledged in cryptozoology is the fact that some of these Bigfoot stories, in terms of, I went into the forest and I was completely disoriented and I couldn't find my way out. I was super familiar with this area, and then I saw a Bigfoot. These are indistinguishable from the pixie-led narratives if you just swap out Mad Libs. If you swap out, Oregon for Dartmoor and you swap out Bigfoot for the Pixies, like it reads the same way. So in other words, I'm not saying that Bigfoot is a fairy, and I'm not saying that fairies are Bigfoot or any of these things. I'm saying at the very least, the way that we metabolize perceived contact with other intelligences remains fairly stable across time and place, right? And that might indicate that these are the same thing. It might indicate that that's just sort of our perceptual bias. It might indicate that they're different things manifesting in our reality in the similar ways. I mean, the example that I'm fond of using lately is that, if I talk to you about something that lives in your house and it's furry and it has 4 legs and a tail and ears, and you pet it and it loves scratches behind the ear, and it comes in and out through a door that's, set into the main door of your house, and you feed it and it gives you love and companionship. I could be talking about a cat and I could be talking about a dog. I mean, I could be talking about a hamster or a gerbil. And anyway, my point is that, well, they're both pets. They're very different things. Don't get me wrong. Like, cats and dogs are very different on a lot of different levels. But they sort of do occupy a similar space in our lives. So maybe that's what we're seeing. I don't know. But those are points of comparison that I think are worth teasing out. And there are lesser, what's the best way to put this? Less famous, less strong correspondences that you can sort of graft on to other cryptids as well. There's a wonderful book that I always encourage people to read. It's Michel Mergier and Claude, I believe it's Claude Gagnon's Lake Monster Traditions. And they look specifically at, lakes in French Canada. And a lot of these lakes that have lake monsters just so happen to have one spot on the lake that's like this mini Bermuda Triangle, where the winds will always prevail in the way that you don't want to go, or it's really easy to get turned around, or compasses will malfunction. So it's all sort of similar in vibe to sort of this broader theme of disorientation.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you have, these encounters with these things. But I guess my next question for you would be, how much do we have to do with it, Josh? Like, are we is this us being pixie led at times, but at other times are we the lead in the dance? You've got this kind of whole co-creation thing again that our friend Greg Bishop would kind of coin. Like, what role do we play in all of this? Are we like could we be considered, the phenomenon as well? I don't know. What does that make sense? What I'm asking.
It does make sense.
Okay.
And so the at the end of each section of the book, the 2 main sections, there's just sort of speculation on some of these more philosophical, transpersonal, depth psychology sort of angles. And I'll be honest with you, Ryan, I resisted the idea that this stuff comes from us in any way, shape, or form for a very long time. But my friend Soraya Azkath, Where Did the Road Go, eventually pushed me to the suspicion. I won't say conclusion, but the suspicion that we are indeed, sort of playing a role, along with Greg's work, as you've talked about. So yeah, I'd leave the door open to the idea that in some way these things might be projections of or from ourselves, or again, meeting something else halfway. And just so many of these experiences are tailor-made to different individuals. There are some sort of thematic and symbolic resonances that I think are worth exploring. The idea of spiritual revelation coming in the wilderness is almost universal. If you look at, certain shamanic initiations, if you look at, even in the Christian tradition of wandering through the desert, or 40 days in the wilderness with Christ. So I think that's all part of it. And if you sit and think with the broader themes of disorientation and navigation, it's all very egocentric, right? Like, I know where I am, and to become lost, you don't know where you are. And there's sort of something that I think mirrors that sort of ego death or ego dissolution that you find across moments of spiritual revelation, or certain psychedelic trips, some of these, or even meditative states. So there's a sense of like you lose a sense of where you are, in that sort of a sense of who you are. And if you've ever been profoundly lost and found your way back to civilization, it does feel like a little mini rebirth narrative, right? Like, you're so relieved, you're like, everything looks brighter, and you're like, oh my goodness, I actually got out of there alive. So I think that there's some, at the very least, some symbolic resonances there, to say nothing of the fact that it's a long-standing tradition across a lot of different religions to use labyrinths as not only metaphors for one's spiritual journey, but also for navigating and inducing contemplative states. I'm sure you've seen or been to or heard about certain religious sites that have a labyrinth in there, not to get people lost, but to lead them through in sort of a meditative state to the other side, right?
Yeah, we've got a few here in Scotland as well too.
Yeah. And this is interesting, though. I realize that. So I know this has not very little to do with the paranormal, but I think it's interesting. There's actually in psychological terms, there's a difference between labyrinths and mazes, right? So a maze is meant to confuse you and get you into dead ends and to transform you, but labyrinths are not meant to sort of occupy that same thing. Labyrinths lead you through a twisting route into the center and back out again. Like, they're not designed to actually stop you or arrest your travel. They're designed to bring you through. And I found that interesting, because I've always used those terms interchangeably.
Right, me too. Interesting. Yeah, I never would have thought of that. Okay, two things I want to touch on with what you just said. I want to rewind back to some of your earlier work when I believe I first met you and interviewed you. This was during your work with UFOs as kind of a symbol of death.
Mhm.
And again, I know we're kind of brushing off the memory banks here, but do you see any of that past work creeping into what you're doing now with this idea of the inverted path and disorientation and all that? Do you still feel the possibility that these phenomena could be some sort of mask for the process of what we call death here on Earth? Yeah, does that play into any of your current work right now that you can?
Yes and no. And
Yeah?
we finally have an at least quasi-officially sanctioned term for this hypothesis.
Okay.
An article popped up on Wikipedia just the other day about the thanatological UFO hypothesis. So I guess that's what we're calling it from here on out, right?
Cool.
Thanatology being the study of death. So it's that's part of the problem with that sort of ecology of souls materials. Like, what do you really call this? Like, the death hypothesis doesn't sound very elegant. But so yes and no, right? I don't necessarily think that everything that I write has to nest neatly into what I've written previously, because I always try to treat things sort of anew with like a new thought experiment. But there are plenty of ways that I can sort of make these ideas play together. Ecology of Souls was all about the paranormal and death. Fourth Wall Phantoms was all about, well, more or less that sort of porous boundary between imagination and real life experience. I'm not convinced that the imaginal realm or the imaginal space isn't the afterlife isn't the same as the afterlife, by which I mean, the when people pass on, they certainly live on in our heads and our hearts, right? So there's sort of that idea that they're sort of kept alive in some sort of meaningful way that we can all sort of agree on objectively, regardless of our religious impulses, that yes, the dead are alive as long as there are people around to remember them. That might be perhaps one of the reasons that ancestor veneration has been so widely accepted across the world, is that like you're literally keeping the dead alive. So those ideas kind of play together. At the same time, when I got to So I did ecology, and I was like, well, how do you go, how do you widen the scope from there? Well, how about like, what is reality? And it's like, well, how do you widen? You don't widen the scope from there. So that's why the inverted path is sort of harkens back to some of the earliest stuff that I did with food taboos and with smells and with child abduction. It's like, well, let's really narrow the focus again and look at something that plays itself out across various paranormal domains. To that end, I do think this is sort of where the title comes from, the inverted path. The theme of inversion kept on popping up time and time and time again across this work. One of the remedies for getting yourself out of being pixie-led and to find your way again was to invert an article of clothing. That was the thing that most commonly broke its spell. And you see contemporary accounts of people who grew up with that folklore being in these narratives and inverting a glove or turning their jacket inside out or something, and suddenly they know where they are. Don't know why that works, except for perhaps the idea that you're being placed into an inverted space. And in that sort of double negative sense, by inverting something in an inverted space, you make things right again. And there are allusions to this in various forms of fairy folklore in Western Europe. The idea that summer in our world was winter in fairyland, or the idea that they laugh at funerals and cry at birth. So there's always sort of this topsy-turvy inverted kind of idea. But it occurred to me, coming back to the whole idea of death, which was your original question, which I promise I'm circling back to.
Perfect.
In these narratives where we get lost, you kind of become a ghost, don't you? Like you're inverted in that sense, and the dead are inverted from us in many ways. But then it sort of puts you in the mindset of like, well, what does a ghost experience in a haunted house? I'm reminded of the Winchester house, that I had a chance to visit, where all these sort of doors leading to nowhere and staircases leading to nowhere and dead ends and such. And the idea, apocryphal though it may be, was that Sarah Winchester was trying to keep ghosts from finding her. But it's this idea of like, you hear these stories about ghosts that, a Revolutionary War soldier who appears to walk on his knees across the floor. And then you find out, the floor of the original house was 3 feet lower than it is today. So what does a ghost experience in a house that's been renovated, where walls have been put up or walls have been knocked down? I would argue that it's probably pretty similar to what we experience when we're pixie-led, right? Oh, this is a very familiar space, but like, this is all different. Why is this different?
Yeah.
I know exactly where I should be. So I do think there's something about, long story short, this idea that we are a mirror image of whatever that other side is, and I think that other side might be the same place that all these sort of mysteries stem from.
That's fascinating. What are some of your favorite cases from the book that you use as examples, I guess, of these things, whether it's part 1, part 2? I want to dig a little bit more into part 2. But
I'm going to be very opportunistic and use my favorite case, which is the case that kind of blew open this whole idea of this book, as sort of a transition to part 2, because it was the case that was hard for me to categorize.
Hello, this is Ryan Sprague, the host of Somewhere in the Skies. If you're enjoying our podcast, our live streams, and our videos, and you'd like to support the show, there are several ways to help while unlocking exclusive perks. Join our Patreon community for early access to episodes, priority guest questions, exclusive articles, bonus content, and access to a growing community of fellow UFO enthusiasts. You can also subscribe to Somewhere in the Skies Premium on Apple Podcasts for ad-free listening, early access, and exclusive premium content. If you're watching on YouTube, consider becoming a channel member to unlock bonus content, members-only posts, badges, and so much more. No matter how you choose to support Somewhere in the Skies, your contribution directly helps fund our research, our production, travel, interviews, and the continued growth of everything we do here. So, to learn more, check the links in the show notes or the video description. And real talk here, guys, thank you for listening and supporting us for almost 10 years. And thank you for supporting independent content. And I hope you'll continue to join me somewhere in the skies.
There's a wonderful book by Dermot McManus called The Middle Kingdom that talks about various stories. One of the first stories in there is a story of a reverend who has one of those field crossing experiences that we were alluding to. But there's another story of, according to McManus, was, I believe, his aunt who needed a caretaker. and she rather, hired this young girl, believe about 18 years of age, in County Mayo, to be the caretaker. And so one day the girl has decided to pay a visit to some neighbors at her new live-in work situation. And she decides that she's a bit homesick. So she walks to the top of this fairy fort called Lis Ard. And she walks to the top of it, and from the top of the fort, she can see the rooftops of her old hometown. So I guess it was rather close. But she stays up there for a while. She sort of scratches that homesick itch, and then she realizes, well, it's kind of chilly. I'm going to get on my way. So she goes down to the bottom of the fairy fort. And if you've ever had the chance to visit some of these fairy forts, a lot of them are hingiform forts, which means that there's actually a moat on the inside. It's the whole thing I can nerd out on. But long story short, there's a ditch that you have to go through and then go up a higher rise and then out the other side.
Gotcha.
And in this story of this young lady being lost atop Lis Ard, she gets to the edge of the fairy fort and can't get out, by which I mean she literally hits an invisible wall. She tries to push against it. It feels everything like there is an invisible wall there. So she retreats back to the top of the fairy fort. As the day goes on, she is overdue for her original visit, and search parties come out. Parties that come within 20 or 30 yards of her, shouting her name. She can see them. She can see their torches. She's yelling out to them. She's causing a racket. There's no reason that they should not be able to see or hear her, and yet they don't. This continues several more times until finally, for whatever reason, she tries in desperation to get out of the fairy fort again, and the invisible wall is no longer there. She gets to the house where she was due around midnight, and cries and tells this whole story. Now, what I think is interesting about that is, number one, remember I was talking about, we kind of become like ghosts whenever we're that sounds like, I bet that's what being a ghost is like. You see people walking around that can't see or hear you. But the other thing is, how do you qualify that story? Like, how do you categorize that? Is that a pixie-led story? Well, it certainly has a lot of the aspects of those field crossing narratives I was talking about earlier, where you're in a space and you can't get out. But there's also this idea of she was stopped from getting out, right? And if you look at that sort of phrase, invisible wall, that has been directly cited in a lot of UFO literature about cars stopping. It's not necessarily that the engine stops, although that happens most of the time. I'm not going to deny that. But there are also illusions of no, my engine was fine, but it was like my car was pushing up against an invisible wall or something was holding it back. So that to me was the light bulb moment when I said, okay, I think, and again, you don't have to co-sign this at all, but I personally have come to the conclusion that the disorientation and the supernatural stopping narratives, famously UFOs stop cars, right? Those are two sides of the same coin. They are both keeping you from where you're going, right? The disorientation is subtle. The stopping of cars is overt. But I think that they really are different expressions of the same idea. And so that leads into the second half of the book, which looks at how UFOs stop cars and horses and people. That's funny. Fairies stop cars and horses and people. Ghosts do it, lights do it, and cryptids do it, which really pushes against what we think cryptids should be, right? But it goes beyond that. It's cars getting stopped, it's livestock getting stopped, it's the wheels of wagons not working, it's psychics stopping locomotives with a glance. It's narratives of paralysis, and it's also narratives of ships becalmed at sea. And again, as I said earlier, I have this contrarian streak, right? And in UFO circles, the most common explanation for this, offered completely without any rigor or thought, is electromagnetism.
Right.
my one
every time.
I had this interaction with a rather prominent ufologist at Contact in the Desert, and a friend of mine was wanting me to pitch some of my work, and I was like, really, just let me. I'm sort of a wallflower in a lot of ways, but I was like, okay, I'll do it. And the latest book came up, and I make mention of this, and the response was, with UFOs stopping cars, that's just electromagnetism, and it's like, hold on, hold on. And I was fresh off of writing this book, and I've got electromagnetism looms over this entire book in a lot of different ways, because we seem to have a magnetic sense of direction. You get these narratives of GPS failing and compasses spinning. Electromagnetism can kill car engines, but it can't stop the wind for ships. It can't take over the steering wheel of a car in 1954. It can't make your brakes fail in 1972. So there's something about this, and there are plenty of other. There's several different cases that I go into in the book, up to and including an engine being disassembled after a UFO sighting over an oil tanker, right? Like
Whoa.
really weird stuff. That's not, I don't care. That's not electromagnetism. So I'm not saying that electromagnetism doesn't play a role, because some of these cases pretty clear cut. People have their hair standing on end and their lights fail, and there are mechanisms for that, right? But not every one of them. And if you dig into sort of the work of the people who really looked into this, like McCampbell and Rodiger, even some of the more conventional stories of UFOs stopping car engines have this puzzling detail of the cars restarting by themselves after the UFO leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what can and can't happen has changed a lot in recent years because of how computerized our cars have become, right? But in the 1960s, if you told a mechanic my car started on its own, they would laugh at you. Like, there's just no way without physical intervention to have made that happen. So electromagnetism plays a role in these stories, but it is far from the entire story. And I would argue that a lot of this starts to look like those expressions of poltergeist activity that sort of wind their way through the UFO narratives that people don't always acknowledge, right?
Yeah. Huh. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to process.
Another good example, and I want to talk about this because I really wish it had been included in the book, but the Tehran UFO incident,
it's my favorite case.
Right. Yeah. I was reading up on it again, and at one point all the instruments went out in the cockpit.
Yep.
Everything went dark. Electromagnetism, right? He goes to trigger the ejection seat, and the ejection seat doesn't work either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would never build an ejection seat that's reliable on electronics. It defeats the point of having an ejection seat. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a mechanical device, right? And so the idea that whatever this is also controlling mechanical devices, I think needs to be looked at a lot more closely. And I, in my own limited way, I tried.
So I guess kind of my overarching question, Josh, and like this is probably the biggest question of the book. I don't expect you to have like the full answer, because I don't think any of us.
What planet do the aliens come from?
Yes,
right?
Exactly. That's what this has all been leading up to, man. So get ready. Why? My question is, why are these things happening? Why are we brought or led down an inverted path? Why are we being interrupted? What does the Bigfoot want? What does the ghost want? What's the alien want? Why are they stopping us? What is this? Why?
Well, I'm going to go through sort of conventional things that were talked about in fairy lore, and then sort of my own speculation. So, in the pixie-led narratives, sometimes it was just for poops and giggles. I don't know what your if you have the explicit rating on your podcast or not.
Not at all, buddy.
It was just for a lark, right? And that meant that, if you died while it happened, it wasn't because the pixies wanted you to die or the fairies wanted you to die. It was just a side effect. It's like, well, I'm sorry, we were just having a good time, right? That was the most common explanation for those disorientation narratives, right? Yeah, it's dark. But there were also indications that it was to reorient you away from fairy territory. There are plenty of stories where it was a prelude to a kidnapping, which obviously is prefigured in some of the UFO literature. You'll see that quite often, where people are compelled to drive down a road that they have no business traveling down, and that's where their experience unfolds, and that's where they get aboard the craft and all that stuff, right? So that's part of it, and I'm not ruling that out. But in the case of the stopping narratives, it's entirely possible that it's a side effect. It really is entirely possible of that. I will say that attention is a currency, right? And in both cases, you sort of are made to pay attention. If you get lost, suddenly you're a lot more aware of your surroundings, right? In the cases of having your car stopped or being paralyzed by a UFO, like, you're definitely going to pay attention to your surroundings. Look at us. But then it gets the question of what is the purpose behind the UFO. Similar to your question about how much of this sort of stuff comes from us, I'm also not ruling out the possibility that this is some sort of innate psychic self-defense technique, that we might not even realize.
Mhm.
Um, there are all sorts of allusions throughout occultism to protective magical circles and invisible barriers and things like that as well. So what if we do all have these sort of psychic talents within us all, which I suspect we do, then maybe we're throwing up these barriers to protect us from something. Or, maybe it's like an immunological response on the behalf of the phenomenon, right? Like, stop, don't get any closer. When you have a pathogen seeking to enter your body, your first line of defense is a barrier. It's literally your skin. And then you get into your body and there are all these things that attack it. So like maybe that's akin to your engine stopping, and then all the physiological effects that people sometimes experience after UFO sightings of conjunctivitis and sunburns. Like maybe that's like a degree further of the immunological response, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that's all sort of also radiation stuff too, which brings electromagnetism back into the discussion. So that is the $1 million question, and all I can sort of present is a plethora of possibilities. One idea that I do settle on is that there are traditions throughout the world, but especially in the Greco-Roman traditions of necromancy, where you sort of stop a spirit to get information from them. And I wonder if something comparable isn't sort of happening, except we're the ones being stopped in these situations. They want something from us and they're stopping us for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating theories, man. Like you said, like we have to ask the questions, it's why, not only why is it happening, but why is the happener making it happen?
Right. And the thing that we have to really be open to, I saw a video essay the other day who was arguing that like cosmic horror should be taught in schools. Like you should have to read Lovecraft and
Oh, hell yeah.
and the King in Yellow and stuff like that, because it sort of introduces you to the idea that there are things that are completely beyond our ability to grasp, motivations that are beyond our ability to grasp, and that like all these things that are so important to us might not really even be intentional or meaningful to the intelligence that's creating them. So that's always the variable that gets thrown into this discussion as well.
Yeah, it's the meaning we give it. Oh, what I would have given for a Lovecraft course in college or high school or middle school.
I'm sure there are places doing it now. There've got to be.
There's got to be, man. There's UFO courses now. Come on.
That's true. That's true.
And parapsychology. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I have one more kind of major question for you, and then I got a few listener questions if you're willing to stick around for those.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Disclosure. Today, 2026. We're living in probably what I consider one of the most how do I say this politely? The most boring times in ufology, and also one of the most mainstream. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm sitting here in August of 2026, and I was out of the UFO discourse for about 2 months. I didn't know what was going on with the congressional stuff, the intelligence people, the UAPDAs, the bills, the offices. And dude, it felt so damn good to not think about that stuff. And I'm just so tired of it. It's boring. It's almost non-intellectual, I guess, anti-intellectual.
It's reheated. I mean, man, I'm not convinced. I've talked with Greg about this a lot, where Greg says that, modern day congressional discussions about UFOs are just 90s ufology, right? Like it's like I have this sense that some of these Congress people are like learning about Dulce bass and being like, did you know? Oh, guys, did you know? It's like, we've been talking about this for a while, and we've sort of, it's not necessarily. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the main reasons that I like people try to talk to me about the happenings going on. I'm like, that's not even my thing. Like I'm with old texts, and I'm with experiencer reports, and that's where I think the real show is, right? I have such mixed feelings about this, Brian, because I've historically been very critical of disclosure, and I think that I've softened on it a great deal. because if the goal, I had the goal of the disclosure movement backwards, right? I thought that the people pushing for disclosure were had this hope of having a moment where a president brings out an alien body and says they come from Zeta Reticuli and all this stuff and like really hard facts. And I'm not sure that was ever the case. I think it was more about sort of putting a crack in the facade of the consensus narrative. And in that sense, I mean, I have to admit it worked. Like you talk to the average person on the street and they're like, I don't know what's going on, but something doesn't add up. Like I'm surprised when I find someone who doesn't think there's anything to the UFO phenomenon nowadays. I'm that happens so rarely in my day-to-day life with, quote unquote normies, right? So if that was the goal, then I think it succeeded. I think that what is an interesting thing, the most interesting thing that's happening to me right now in this space is that I'm starting to get this sense of the dog that caught the car. By which I mean, okay, well, we've got people questioning this. Now what? And I think that, and you know this as well as I do, the truth of what, it's not, truth is a strong word. A lot of people in the disclosure movement are fully aware of the fact that this touches on aspects of consciousness and things that are soul adjacent, like religion adjacent. I don't know, but like there are a lot of people who really suspect that, who have been pushing the disclosure movement. And I just don't know if that's the conversation that I don't think people are willing to have, right? It's like little green scientists, that's fine. But like once you start getting into this weird stuff, the conversation is going to get uncomfortable for a lot of people, I think. And at the same time, it's weird because like we're already sort of starting to flirt with that. Like would you have ever thought that like you'd hear the word psionics and consciousness controlled craft as much as we are in the discourse? It's so strange to me. And I don't think that anybody's really sitting with the implications of that. Like the metaphysical dimensions of like, oh, a craft that's controlled by your consciousness. It's like, okay, well then, it's the near-death experience researchers and the consciousness researchers and the psychonauts who have a lot more to say about the greater truth behind this than it is the ufologists, right?
Right.
So yeah, I kind of don't know what to make of this moment. It's shaken out differently than I thought it would. And I'm just trying to sort of, I have a big interesting if true basket inside my head, right? I have a small true basket and a small false basket, and this interesting if true basket that's just overflowing these days. And we'll see what happens. But I definitely resonate with you. I mean, it's felt like, I don't even want to say 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. It's been like 3 steps forward and 5 steps back, and then 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's been it has not been a steady progression towards any sort of disclosure in that original sense that I meant of like knowing anything. It's definitely been sort of the staggered version of half steps and half measures. Yeah, I totally get it, And so I sort of let it wash over me. But the other thing is, man, like my retention for this stuff is just not there. Like I can't. It all happens so fast, and it's also fluid and also changing, that it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, which is why I've preferred for my position over the past, several years to be like, well, I'm just going to wait and see where things land, right? See where the dust settles. Yeah. But yeah, I totally feel you on that.
Yeah. Would you say, Josh, it's disorienting? Yeah, I do. I do.
I mean, yeah. It's and this is the thing that so not only is it disorienting, but it's there was a lot of understandable hand-wringing over the possibility that this might be the administration to give us some sort of UFO truth. And I just had to take the perspective that this is entirely predictable from that George P. Hansen trickster in the paranormal sort of position. Like, of course, this is the moment when we would get something approaching disclosure, because there's always going to be this, oh, well, it came from this administration sort of attitude. It's so, I mean, like, we could have explicit truths, quote unquote, come out from authorities, honestly, worldwide. People are feeling this way, at least across the West, right? Our authority structures could say this is what's happening, and half the population at least is not going to believe it. So of
Mhm.
course, this is when the phenomenon in all its tricksterish glory would choose the moment to become the most visible, is when you could always have that aspect of plausible deniability, right?
Yep. The tricksters have done it again, my friend.
Absolutely,
Ah,
absolutely.
amazing. Thank you for that
Yeah.
candor. I needed to hear it. I needed
No,
to hear
you're
it
not alone.
reflected back to me.
You are
Yeah.
not alone. Yeah. And
Um,
here's the other thing, man. I just
yeah,
think that
please.
the not only the experiencer stories the most important thing, which is what your work has always been about, how these experiences change people and stick with them, but they're also evergreen. They're not going to be changed by any amount of redaction or anything like that.
Mhm.
They're not.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. Yeah. Oh, the experiencers first and foremost, always for
Yeah.
me. Um, awesome. Well, we've got some experiencers on our Patreon who wanted to ask you
All
some
right.
questions. Josh, you ready for these?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have Aaliyah on Patreon. She is at the top of the list here. Thank you for your support, Aaliyah. Why do some people, Josh, seem repeatedly drawn into anomalous experiences while others never encounter them at all? What might make someone more susceptible or receptive to these different types of phenomenon, in your opinion?
Yeah, so our mutual friend Red Pill Junkie has theorized that just as some people might be colorblind, some people might be, paranormal blind or
Huh,
something like that.
love
Um,
that.
Maybe it's that Richard Dawkins just doesn't have those receptors in his mind or his consciousness. Um, I think there's a lot. Well, number one, I think that most people you talk to will have had something odd happen in their lives. Um, Number 2, I would say that I think that there are a lot of little things that we experience every day that we like, catch a shadow out of the corner of our eye and we're like, "Oh, what was oh, guess it was nothing." We just sort of move on, right? And
Mhm.
that might have been, not always, certainly not, but that might have been something genuinely anomalous. I do think that there is something to the idea of dissociation and trauma being a part of this. You look at sort of I've heard it leveled as a criticism at the modern horror genre that people are getting tired of trauma horror, and I get that. But if you look at the phenomenon, there does seem to be something to it, right? The actual phenomenon itself, and not just the way it's portrayed in media. But I think that sort of misses the point. I don't think that the trauma. It's like, oh, trauma opens you up to paranormal experiences. I think that yes, in a one way, but it's not really the trauma that's doing it. I think it's the dissociation aspect, right?
Yeah.
Because people can have a psychedelic experience or a meditative experience or be anything that sort of pushes them into that sort of dissociative state. Certain mental health conditions, anything that pushes them into that sort of dissociative state, I think is sort of what allows you to tune into this stuff a little bit more. It's just that it just so happens that a lot of the way people get into a dissociative state is through trauma, right? Where they're
Mhm.
And so I think that this is just my hypothesis, but I think that it's like spraining your ankle, right? So like once you sprain your ankle once, you're a lot more likely to roll that ankle again in the future.
Right.
And I think that as someone who has an ankle that he has to watch out for. Um, and so I suspect that once you have that sort of initial like separation of consciousness from your body, or that ability to sort of dissociate, which is a lot of what we've just been talking about with disorientation, right? Once you have that ability to dissociate, you can lapse into that state much better, and that makes you sort of a walker between two worlds, right? That's
Yeah.
just my own idea. Because if you look at like sort of the data, people will have a near-death experience and then they'll have UFO experiences after that, or people will have a UFO experience and then later have a near-death experience, or they'll
Right.
live in a haunted house and then they'll see a UFO later. Like there's never a real like catalyst or chicken and the egg sort of thing, but a lot of times you'll go back and there will be something about some sort of mental abuse, physical abuse, or physical trauma, right? And it's an uncomfortable topic, but there is reason to suspect that amongst experiencers there is a higher incidence of things like child abuse in their past. Again, not saying everyone, because I just said it's all about dissociation, it's not about trauma, but from the stats that I've seen, it's higher than the national average, which even talking about a national average for child abuse turns my stomach, but you take my meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess to stay on the controversial track a little bit, in terms of that, you have these things like the telepathy tapes. Now,
Mhm.
again, not something I have looked into. I'm not going to pretend to even know what it's all about, have a opinion on it. I haven't read into any of it. But do you think that maybe like someone on the spectrum, as they say, could be more susceptible to things that are non-conventional, paranormal, telepathic? I don't know. Does that play into any of this in your personal
Yeah.
opinion? If you're comfortable
No, I mean, no, it's
talking
so
about that?
I touched upon this a bit towards the end of Thieves in the Night. And I had the sort of misgivings as you do, because there's sort of that trope in media of like, the magically disabled person, right? The disabled person, developmentally disabled person who is able to contact other realms or has magical powers. And it's like, it's cringe, right? But you do have stuff like the telepathy tapes. You do have a discussion that's been ongoing in the religious studies area for a long time about the possibility that certain ascetics and monks and saints and holy people were on the spectrum as well. Um, you also have firsthand testimony from friends of mine like Kevin Can, who are autistic and who say, yes, part of the reason that I'm able to tap into this is because I am autistic. And this discussion is still ongoing in the work of folks like Dr. Jeff Kripal. He mentions it in his book, How to Think Impossibly. So there is a thread that I think deserves to be pulled on there. The problem is when you just automatically make people into superheroes, right? And that's not what we're being called to do. We're being called to sit with people and to listen to people and treat them as human, but also to be open to them when they say, I have a different lived experience than people who are not on the spectrum or than people who are not neurodivergent, right? But I do think that there is something in that we need to sort of sit with and be aware of.
Okay. I love that. Darren from Osaka asks through email, Josh. Big fan of your work. The all one thing hypothesis is very interesting. On the biggest possible scale, does that mean you don't think there's anything out there that's literally extraterrestrial or literally interdimensional in a physical sense? Like when we're talking about that kind of interconnectedness of
Mhm.
phenomena, like
Yeah.
do you think there are actual aliens visiting, angels performing miracles, Bigfoot, Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
personal thoughts on that?
I love getting this question because I think that sometimes I do get sort of misread, and I get misread, and I also misrepresent myself, right? So yeah, I think that with all these topics, we need to be open to a plurality of explanations, right? Um, I would also sort of cite the conversation where the analog that I mentioned earlier of cats and dogs, right? I will say that I firmly believe that there is extraterrestrial life of varying degrees of evolution of advanced nature, probably even civilizations out there, right? I really do. I just I'm not entirely convinced that's what we're interacting with here on Earth. Um, I don't think people fully grasp the scale of the universe. Um, and there are these wonderful animations that you can look at that sort of show you how far you can dial out and just keep going. Um, but I have to remain possible because, like, if you look at sort of the ancient alien stuff, controversial though it may be, it just had to happen once. Like, as long as it's happened once in
Right.
in our history, then yeah, it's true. So I think that there's the possibility for that, and I have to leave that possibility open. I just see so many of these experiences getting into, for lack of a better term, spiritual things. And I have to say that I think that if it's aliens, it's just really weird aliens, like really weird aliens doing the psionics and the consciousness stuff, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
but yeah, as far as I'm a believer in extraterrestrial life somewhere out there, I'm just not sure that's what the UFO phenomenon is, because the UFO phenomenon is so like symbolic and personal and
Mhm.
transcendent, and you've got stories of souls being taken out and it's responding through telepathy, and telepathy means that materialism isn't necessarily the governing paradigm, and if we don't need materialism, then why do they have to be extraterrestrial, all those things. Similarly with the cryptid stuff, Mike Cleland talks about UFOs and owls. Mike totally believes in real owls. He believes that owls exist, right? But there's also the owls that aren't owls, the owls that are weird owls. So with something like Bigfoot, we might have a small population of relict hominids living in certain places, and that's another mask like the owls that the phenomenon chooses to take, right? I think so. I think that's possible. Similarly, though, I have to say that I just as ufologists don't always fully apprehend the scope of the universe, I don't think cryptozoologists fully apprehend how deep the timeline goes. I mean, I mentioned this in the new book, but it's mind-boggling to me that it is more historically accurate to have a T-Rex holding an iPhone than to have a T-Rex battling a Stegosaurus. By which I mean there's less time between the iPhone and the T-Rex than there is between a dadgum Stegosaurus and a T-Rex. And that's just like, that just gives you an idea of how deep the Earth's history is. And what I mean by that is that if we have a Plesiosaurus looking more or less like it did, I don't know, 120 million years ago. I don't have the stats in front of me, but you take my meaning. Like, if that's what's in Loch Ness, like that's just a long time to remain unchanged and to remain, for us to not have had more interaction with it, to not have a body. Like, that's just it's a long ass time, right? Yeah. So those are the axes that I grind. But I have to leave the door in intellectual honesty. I have to leave the door open to all those things. So there we go.
I love that.
That's where I'm at.
Awesome. You and me both, buddy. Cool. Last listener question here. Back on Patreon, we have Sam the Wise Ass. Love that name. Sam the Wise Ass asks, Josh, love ecology of souls. There we go. Love ecology of souls. What is the biggest question you were left with after writing Inverted Path? Something your research brought you closer to, but ultimately couldn't answer.
I honestly, and this sounds kind of a little bit like a cop-out, but it is that question that you asked me towards the end of our main discussion, which is like, why?
Why?
Why is the car stopping? Because sometimes it does seem like it's deliberate, and sometimes it seems like it's completely a byproduct, why disorient people? I mean, like in the pixie-led narratives, so very rarely do you actually get like a pixie popping up and being like, and running off. It's usually those stories end like people, the spell breaks and they hear laughter all around them, right? Which again, the entire reason that they attribute it to pixies is context dependent. It's what they grew up with and the stories that they heard, right? Mm-hmm. But like, I can't really get to the why in either case. And the fairy stuff's like shits and giggles. Like that's what they say it's for. But I don't have a really good idea of why we have. I mean, there's a great story from New Zealand in the book that it's books. It's a wonderful book that is written by Linda Zimmerman, Animal Reactions to UFOs, and she talks about in 1971, this witness on horseback in New Zealand, the dogs stop, the horse freezes, and the rider freezes as well. Cannot move. None of them can move. And this UFO just sort of like goes across the field of view, and then afterwards everything's back to normal. All of them can move again, right? Why? Like, what's up with that? Like, yeah. And that's why the only thing I can get to is that sort of arresting of attention. But that to me was the biggest question. And so I tried to leave it on a whole bunch of different possibilities. I leave the book on because I really can't nail down any single one. So that's probably the biggest question. Although, I have so many questions about this, and that's why I really think that to be involved in the space, I think it is healthy to adjust your expectations and properly orient your goals, by which I mean, I'm not looking for answers. What I'm looking for is a better understanding, right? Yeah. I'm looking to have a lot of different options that may speak to me on one day and not on another day. And then I'm looking to sort of see how I can apply those in my own life and my own spiritual journey and all those different things.
I love that. Do you feel you've ever been pixie-led, ever been interrupted, disoriented in terms of these phenomenology personally?
I'm sure I have, Ryan. I just can't remember a specific example. I do talk towards the end of the book. I was doing my research in my car, and and it's the one time, I'm gonna knock on wood, right?
Yeah.
It's the one time like
Good God.
my battery died.
Mhm.
It's like my battery died while I was researching this topic, which was kind of odd.
Oof.
I was in church of all places, and the pastor starts the sermon saying, this is while I was researching this book, the pastor starts the sermon and gets up there and goes, I want you to imagine that you're walking along the Appalachian Trail, and I don't know, a troll pops out of the bushes and blindfolds you and spins you around and then takes off the blindfold and you don't know where you're going. And I'm like, you just
What?
talk about being pixie led while I'm researching this? Like, what are the odds of that?
Oh my
So
God,
I
man.
do get, when I'm working on books, I do get sucked into these little synchronicities that kind of land with a gut punch. It's like, oh, this is really weird. What are the odds of that? But I
Mm.
think that we all have been we've fallen prey to that sort of disorientation at different times in our lives, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned earlier disassociating from it. A lot of people
Yeah.
just kind of shy away from these experiences, whether they're big and profound or, subtle and insidious too.
Oh, I'm sure as soon as we hang up, I'm gonna remember an
Yeah.
event where I was disoriented. But honestly, like the experience itself of being lost can be so, here's that word again, traumatic, that I might have just sort of blocked it out. I
Right.
just sort of
Right.
block out the experience. It was too scary. You know.
Well, you let me know. We'll get back on
All right.
Patreon and do a little bonus episode, Josh. But
Sounds good to
uh,
me.
dude, this has been fascinating. I've kept you longer than I told you.
Oh,
So,
great.
of course, I got to ask you, where can we find the book? This will be going out in just a few days now,
Okay.
on Monday of this upcoming week. So, do you have anything coming up, any events or anything like that? Yeah, tell us where we
Yeah.
can find everything.
Let me look up everything. Well, while I look up my upcoming
Busy
dates,
man.
yeah, while I look up my upcoming dates, you can find everything that you need to about me. If you really hate yourself and want to listen to every interview I've ever done, you can find that there too at joshuacutchin.com. That's JOSHUACUTCHIN.com. And that's a good way to find out about upcoming appearances, and you can reach out to me directly through there about buying my books. I do the medium mail in the United States. uh, Overseas, I don't trust the post going out of the US at all. The next event that I will be at is the 2026 Van Meter Visitor Festival in Van Meter, Iowa, and that is taking place September 26th of 2026. Then I will be at Cumberland Con in Somerset, Kentucky, October 10th through October 11th. There is likely another event that's happening in November that is not finalized yet, so I'm not going to speak to that. But just keep an eye out on my website, and it'll appear there when it does.
Awesome. And again, guys, the website's right there on your screen. Links for everything will be in the show notes as well if you're just listening to this on the podcast. But this has been awesome, man. Again, the book is The Inverted Path: Supernatural Disorientation and Interruptions in Travel by Joshua Cutchin. Thank you so much for joining us again, my friend. This was awesome.
It was great, Ryan. Great to catch up, and great questions, and this was wonderful. Thank you.